I am the first memory. For those just finding the path, they called her Kaelin, cast out of her village for the sin of making things grow. The forest that should have devoured her named her its own, and showed her the price her parents paid to keep the world whole. She could have run. She knelt and swore the vow instead. But a promise is only breath. Today, the forest asks her to bleed for it. To carry its first law, Kaelin must let it carve into her very bones, and learn that strength is never given. It is endured. This is Chapter 12, The Law of Endurance.
The Grove of Echoes remained in a state of absolute breathless suspension. A silent and resonant weight defined the air, a pressure so heavy it felt as though the very atoms of the forest were holding their breath, waiting for Kaelin's unspoken vow to settle into the bedrock. Her choice hung in the silver light of the willows like a thread of spun silk. It was a new and permanent addition to the ancient tapestry of her family's story. Standing as a mountain of moss and memory, the oak sentinel gave a slow, deep nod. This gesture acted as a solemn acceptance, the forest itself acknowledging that the key had finally been turned. Kaelin knelt before the memory stone, her fingers still trembling from the heat of the vision she had just witnessed. The stone was a primary slab of the Pact Stone Circle, yet here in the Grove of Echoes, it felt more like a private altar. It sat half-buried in a bed of velvety moss, its surface worn smooth by generations of rain and wind. The faint, spiraling pattern carved into its center was a mirror of the wooden pendant resting against Kaelin's heart. The sentinel stood back, a silent observer, granting her the space to claim her place in history. Rowan padded to her side and pressed his warm body against her leg. His unwavering presence acted as a shield against the cold sorrow still emanating from the rock. Kaelin looked at the names already etched there, tracing the curves of the letters with her mind. At the top, the name of Lyra was little more than a ghost in the granite. Below it, hundreds of other names formed a river of history. Then she saw them. The names of her mother and father were fresh, raw wounds in the memory of the stone. 10 years of resentment, the feeling of being abandoned, and the belief that she was unloved finally dissolved into the soil. They had not left her. They had simply gone ahead to prepare the way. They had walked into the dark so she could one day find the light. A hard core of purpose solidified within Kaelin's chest. Sliding the worn leather satchel from her shoulder, she reached inside. Her fingers bypassed the healing herbs and the remaining honeycakes, seeking a specific weight. It closed around the smooth wooden handle of her small pruning knife. This was a simple tool, a relic of her life as a gardener, now destined for a work of cosmic masonry. Kaelin did not attempt to carve a grand, mystical symbol. She chose to use her own name. Pressing the tip of the blade to the granite, she found a space just below the traces of her parents' handprints. The stone was harder than any wood she had ever worked. It resisted her with a stubborn, ancient pride. With a careful and deliberate pressure, she began to etch the first letter. The sound of steel scraping against stone was the only noise in the sanctuary. It was a sharp, grating, and deeply human sound in a place of silent magic. Steel bit into the ancient granite, scraping as it went. Kaelin's shoulder burned, and her knuckles turned white as she forced the blade through the stone's stubborn, ancient pride. This wasn't just carving. It was a war. The first stroke was a jagged scar, 1,000 years of silence pushed back against her, trying to dull the steel blade with the weight of ancient history. As the knife bit into the granite, the scent of her mother's hair flared in her mind. It carried the perfume of crushed leaves and summer rain. a phantom comfort from a lost life. This carving was for the woman who had sung to the stars. It was for the mother who had walked into the dark so her daughter could see the light. A rhythmic jarring traveled from the stone to her shoulder, a vibration so intense it made her teeth ache. The second letter was a battle against the weight of the village. As the steel carved the crossbar, the word hagkin echoed in her mind, a cold and sharp insult. Finn's sneer and Elder Thane's stony judgment flickered before her eyes while the sterile, dusty smell of the gray rot clawed at her throat. She recalled her father's large hands covering her ears when she was a child. A silent, protective command to ignore the village's noise and listen only to the soil. They fear what they cannot harvest, little sprout. This letter was her answer to Edgehaven. Refusing to be a monster or a blight, Kaelin stood as a woman of the wood, a soul reclaiming the identity they had tried to strip away. The third letter required a deeper focus. The granite was dense here, refusing to yield. Her knuckles turned white as she fought the stone. Sweat beaded on her forehead and stung her eyes, yet the work continued. The memory of the open door she had left behind flared in her mind. It had been a small act of defiance and a refusal to be erased. With every scrape of the knife, she anchored the truth of her existence into the bedrock. No longer a ghost in her own life, Kaelin acted as a physical presence, carving her story into the very foundation of the world. The fourth letter, felt lighter. She thought of Rowan. She pictured his one-eyed face and the rough, familiar texture of his fur. He was the only one who had never looked at her with fear. He was the only one who had never stayed silent when she was hurting. This letter was for loyalty. It was for the silent guardian who is currently watching her from the moss. White dust from the rock coated her fingers, looking like bone ash in the golden light. She was no longer just carving stone. She was carving her place in the world. A single vertical line. The fifth letter was a pillar of resolve. Images of that soundless, sunken glade returned to haunt her. She recalled the weightless white fog where the world had been stripped of scent and sensation, the place where sound itself went to die. She felt again the creeping onset of sensory death, and a moment she had discovered the tiny, flickering ember of her own spirit in the heart of that absolute nothingness. I am Kaelin, she thought. The words, a silent shout in the quiet grove. I am here. I am real. The I was the straightest line on the stone, a testament to the internal light that the forest could not extinguish. The final letter was a struggle of exhaustion. Her hand began to cramp, the muscles in her forearms screaming from the repetitive strain. She thought of her father's unyielding strength, the way he had once carried her home through a summer storm, his pace steady and his arms a fortress against the thunder. She reached for the memory of that stability now, using the ghost of his strength to steady her failing grip. She pressed the blade one last time, forcing the steel to finish what she had started. The N was slightly crooked, a testament to the trembling humanity behind her resolve. It was imperfect, just like her. It was flawed, just like the forest. She completed the stroke and drew the knife back, letting it rest in her lap. Her name now sat in the gray stone as a set of fresh white lines beneath the weathered marks of her mother and father. She had physically and symbolically claimed her place. She looked at the three names, bound together by choice and by tragedy. A wave of stinging heat for the family she never had, and a surge of fierce pride for the legacy she had accepted, swelled in her chest. It was a single, powerful, and heartbreaking beat. It is recorded. The Sentinel's voice rumbled within her mind. The name is claimed, but understand the weight of the path you have chosen. Seed of renewal. The law of Stonebark is not a weapon for the swift or a shield for the weak. It is the law of endurance. It is the strength to remain standing when a world falls silent. It is the foundation upon which all other laws are built. Now we return to the heart. The vow must be sealed where the song is loudest. The colossus began to move, turning back toward the main clearing. Every step the sentinel took was a monumental event. The ground groaned under the weight of stone and ironwood, and the blooming veins beneath his feet flared with an intense gold as the earth rejoiced at his wakefulness. Kaelin followed, her own footsteps feeling small and fragile in the wake of such immense power. They walked back through the Heartgrove, passing beneath the curtain of weeping willows. The air grew thicker and warmer as they approached the center, smelling of the sweet, sharp scent of ancient resin. Kaelin watched as the sanctuary reacted to the sentinel's presence. Birds with feathers like autumn leaves took flight in silent, orchestrated patterns. Small, stone-skinned lizards scurried into the cracks of the monoliths, their eyes glowing with the same amber light as the guardians. The forest was waking up, shedding the stagnation of the hush, as the first law prepared to bind itself to a new host. They reached the base of the heartwood tree. The massive trunk towered above them, its wounded breech pulsing with a steady golden light. This was the primary Packstone circle. "Stand," the sentinel decreed. "The vow must be sealed in the presence of the heartwood. 3 questions I ask of the candidate. Answer not with words, but with the truth of your spirit." Kaelin stood, her legs feeling like lead, but her gaze remained level with the sentinel's amber eyes. "When the stillness comes for your memories, what will remain?" the guardian asked. The question hit her like a physical blow, dragging her mind back to the cottage, the village, and the gray dust of the rot. Kaelin thought of her mother's hair, the smell of the rain, and the tiny wren she had whittled for Alara. She pictured Rowan's one-eyed face and the warmth of his fur. "Love," her spirit answered, a pulse of warmth that the sentinel acknowledged with a slight tilt of its head. "When the fire of change burns away the world you know, what will you hold?" Images of her garden, ruined by the rot, and her home, lost to the banishment, rose unbidden. The open door she had left behind remained a sharp memory, a tiny, lingering act of defiance. It was a truth that settled deep within her spirit, that while everything physical could be stripped away, the will to continue could not. Hope, she projected, a fierce and stubborn light in the dark of her mind. "And when the void opens beneath your feet, will you stand?" Kaelin remembered the Foggrave Hollow. During the vision at the Heartwood Tree, the names of the places she had survived had been etched into her mind, as if they were labels on an ancient map. She recalled the sensory death of the White Void and the tiny flame she had found within herself. She didn't answer with a concept this time. She answered with a memory of the shifting fenstones, of her fingers bleeding as they gripped the rock to pull herself back from the dark water. "I will stand," she resolved. The sentinel gave a slow, deep nod. The air in the grove seemed to thicken, charged with the approval of the heartwood itself. The time for deliberation had ended. The ceremony was about to begin. Slowly, the ancient protector raised a great stony limb. It was a hand forged from the very elements of the forest, fingers of iron-hard bark, a palm of moss-covered rock, and joints that moved with the patience of deep time. The sentinel extended this offering toward her, a silent demand for trust. Kaelin understood what was required. Her heart pounded a heavy rhythm against her ribs. This was the moment the legend became a reality. The pact would no longer be a choice she had made. It would become a physical, undeniable part of her, a mark on her very flesh and bone. She held out her left forearm. Her skin looked pale and vulnerable in the golden light of the grove. This was her final offering. She was ready for the pain and the power to follow. The Sentinel's massive fingers descended. They closed around her forearm with a pressure that seemed to find her very bones. The rough texture of the bark was a strange contrast against her soft skin. The contrast was immense. The ancient guardian of the Elderbranch, and the girl who was now its only hope. To her surprise, the Sentinel's touch was not cold. It was warm. The hand pulsed with the same life-giving energy as the heartwood tree itself. It was the heat of sun-warmed rock and life that endures through ages. A connection was forged in that single touch. Bark met bone as ancient spirit greeted young flesh. The energy from the Sentinel began to flow. A deep and resonant hum started in Kaelin's arm before vibrating through her entire being. It was an ancient song beginning to rewrite her very soul. The hum intensified. Comfort gave way to an overwhelming surge as the gentle vibration escalated into a roar of energy. The warmth became a searing white-hot heat, a wave of raw magic that flooded Kaelin's arm and crashed through her entire body. Molten rock seemed to pour into her veins. A raw scream tore itself from her throat, a sound involuntary and absolute. This was an agony beyond physical injury. The pain felt both fiery hot and stone cold. Every nerve in her body screamed in protest, yet through a red haze of suffering, a single thought burned. I chose this. This is mine. The golden light of the grove fractured into 1,000 brilliant shards as her vision swam. This was not the gentle bestowing of a gift. It was a forging. The ancient magic of the Elderbranch was rewriting her. It was binding itself to her mortal flesh while her body resisted the violent transformation. She felt the magic sinking deeper, bypassing her muscle to coil around her very bones. It was the feeling of bones turning to ironwood. Her consciousness began to slip, battered by the sheer volume of the forest's power. She felt the roots of the heartgrove answering the call. The entire sanctuary vibrated in sympathy with the mark being made on her arm. Through the fog of pain, Kaelin looked down. The Sentinel's unyielding grip anchored her to the earth as her skin began to glow with an intensity that rivaled the sun. A pattern traced in lines of brilliant light burned itself into existence. It originated as a single point of unbearable radiance in the center of her forearm, before spiraling outward to etch itself into her skin. This was the first sigil she had seen in the chaotic vision of the tree. Now she understood its meaning in her very bones. The Sigil of Stonebark, a perfect and elegant spiral. The lines were clean and sure. The symbol sat housed within a larger, circular pattern that resembled the growth rings of an ancient oak. These were not mere marks on her skin. The lines looked like living wood. They resembled golden saplings growing directly into her flesh, their roots taking hold in her skeletal frame. The sigil pulsed with a life of its own, a miniature version of the heartwood's rhythmic beat. It was the law of endurance, written in her own blood. The infusion of power reached its peak. The sheer and violent beauty of the connection was too great for a mortal frame to bear. Kaelin's world dissolved into a spiraling blur of gold and deep green. Strength fled from her knees. She felt her mind fracturing under the immense, crushing weight of the law she now carried. She was no longer just Kaelin of Edgehaven. She was a vessel for the forest's survival. As she began to collapse, the last thing Kaelin registered was a sound. It was a deep and collective rush of wind that swept through the entire grove. A noise felt impossibly like the great trees of the Elderbranch were bowing in recognition. Her consciousness, overwhelmed and remade, finally surrendered. Kaelin faded into a deep and blessedly welcome blackness. The binding was complete.
The first law is carved. The steel has bitten, and the girl who entered the grove did not walk out of it. Kaelin carries the strength of stonebark now, the patience of mountains, the weight of the deep earth. But a gift this heavy does not simply obey. Power without mastery is only a new way to fall. Before she can stand against the silence, she must first learn to carry her own strength. And the forest is not a gentle teacher. The frost is already on the wind. The ash-bound does not rest, and he is closer than she knows. Next, the heavy foundation. I remain the first memory. Watch the shadows, for they are watching you.